everyone, and welcome to From the Booth. I'm John Bartlett alongside Greg Millen, where we chat with broadcasters from our hockey industry and get some good tales and stories along the way. Greg, you hear a lot of people right now when we talk about social distancing and the need to stay 2 meters apart, 6.5 feet. Have you noticed the reference that we've seen, especially a lot in Canada, to stay the length of a hockey stick apart?
I have, and only in Canada, and I absolutely love it. And it makes sense.
It does, except unless you're using Zdeno Chara's stick.
Right.
I don't know how many sticks are 2 meters in length. I thought about that the other day. It's like talking about the hockey stick, but how many people use a stick that's 6.5 feet long?
Good point. He's one.
He's one. He's one and the only one. But that is why we transitioned to today's guest, because we're talking about length and height, and somebody that certainly wouldn't be using a 6.5 foot stick length when he was playing. But boy, he was good at stopping the puck, and he's even a better broadcaster and funny person to talk to. So we're pleased to have the TV analyst for the St. Louis Blues join us today. Your good friend and a great friend to ours in this show, Darren Pang. Darren Pang, pleased to have you join us today on our inaugural ride here. How are you doing?
I am doing fantastic, guys. I know that we're seeing a lot more of this type of interaction, whether it be on Zoom or just FaceTiming family and maybe having a happy hour by FaceTime in a group of buddies. But I mean, not ideal, but hopefully everybody's doing the right thing and just staying safe. I think that's all that we're all concerned about.
Panger, why don't we start off? I mean, it's great that you're our first guest because we have so much history of being really together when we started in this crazy broadcast business. So do you want to share that story? I don't think we've ever really told it very much.
I think it deserves a big show, Millsy, because as you well know, our good friend Lisa Seltzer, who is by far the most instrumental producer, although she was a producer and a director, as you know, Greg, with the Chicago Blackhawks back in the old Hawk Vision sports channel, Sports Vision, all those years. She was so ahead of her time. She got you and I I was retired, right, Millsy, at that point? I think I was my first year out.
I think so. Yeah.
And then you were brought in at the trade deadline, and with Mike Keenan, we needed 458 goalies just in case he wanted to pull 30 at a time. And
yes.
But we sat up in the organ loft of the old Chicago Stadium, and I remember having that Marantz recorder that I would carry around, and I was doing the hotline for the Blackhawks in the pregame on the WBBM News Radio 78. And she says, "Why don't you guys do the game up there? Millsy will be the analyst. You do play-by-play, and I will cut it to the video, and we'll put a tape together." But not only just doing that, she goes a step further. She sets up an actual studio for us down in the bowels of the stadium. And before the game, we did our open. Hi again, I'm Darren Pang alongside my analyst, Greg Millen. And Greg, Maple Leafs and the Blackhawks tonight, and what are your keys to the game? And then you went, you did it, and then I went back and forth, and then we did it for every period. We had an entire hockey game to do and send. And I think it's really neat, Millsy, that here you and I, over 30 years later, are still in the business. And that tape was kind of the impetus to you getting it to maybe John Shannon at Hockey Night. Is that right?
Actually, not. It was, we used to call him TV Johnny, but it was John Hudson, who was the executive producer of the Ottawa Senators. Yeah. And oddly enough, they were in the first year of the league the next year, and I got booted out of the league. Well, I had a little cup of tea after the Mike Keenan fiasco. And then, so I started as the first broadcaster in Ottawa only because of that tape, thanks to you and Lisa. So it's amazing how things work. And here you and I have, I guess we're old guys now, but we've done just about everything. We've been so fortunate in this business, and it really did start with you and I up in the loft in Chicago while Mike was pulling me in and out of the net, and you were running around with a tape recorder wanting to get into the business. And you mentioned John Shannon. He was the one that initially said, as a player, and he may have said the same to you, I don't know, you should think about broadcasting because it's something you might be good at. So I owe a lot to John as well, but certainly Lisa Seltzer doing that for us was unbelievable.
Yeah, Millsy, and I'm sure we all have our stories about this, but when I went to training camp in 1990, I had rehabbed my knee in 89, 90. I went down to Indianapolis, and the team won the Turner Cup, and Jimmy Waite was the next guy. And I was playing tennis, and I actually re-injured my knee. Could I have continued playing? Yeah, there was a possibility. I would have had a little more surgery and done so. I get to training camp, and Bob Fulford tells me to just watch and, just sit in the stands and think about what you want to do. But in the meantime, I'm looking down on the ice, and there's Jimmy Waite, Eddie Belfour, Dominic Hasek, and a group of goaltenders that are there. And then I sat in a meeting with Pulley, Larry Kelly, he was on the phone call, my agent at the time, Lisa Seltzer, and I think Mr. Wirtz was with me as well.
Wow.
And I think I had 4 or 5 instrumental people in my life telling me to retire and get into broadcasting. So I figured that it was probably a light bulb went off, and I should probably do what they're all saying I should do.
You know what's amazing about that story? I had a contract with the Philadelphia Flyers, and it was an American League contract and an NHL contract. My wife just delivered our 4th. We came back to Peterborough, and I was all over the map my last year of pro, and it was Bob Gainey who sort of first of all influenced me, and then I was a goalie coach in Minnesota, a broadcaster in Ottawa. I don't know how the heck you could do that today. But I said to Bob, what should I do? And he said, I think you're a better broadcaster than a goalie coach. So be a broadcaster. And then I went on from there afterwards. So some crazy people that influence you in funny ways, huh? John?
But this is something that I've learned along the way too, though, Millsy, and that is some people need to hear it. And I think maybe by people telling us way back then, it's important for somebody if I see somebody at the end of their career and they're humming and hawing about coming back, I'll often take them aside and say, listen, you did everything you had to do. Now it's time to move on. And I think it's good to hear that from people that you trust their opinion, and then you can make a decision and go on, or you can fight through it and play for as long as you can play or what have you. But I'm proud of the fact that I think I retired a couple of players along the way and it was the right decision.
I love the fact that you guys started that way. I mean, when you think about it, so many broadcasters start that way where, it's the tape recorder up in the building, and here you guys are ex-players doing it that way. Jim Ralph was the same way, right? When he was in and out of games, that's how he started doing color. He would do color in the booth with John Edlifson, who was the broadcaster at the time for the Newmarket Saints, and that's how he got his start. So I think it's kind of cool that same way. Even though you guys were players, you kind of started it the same way that most broadcasters would.
John, taking it a step further, you mentioned Ralphie, and I always have fun with this because we're talking about, Greg and I kind of starting out our broadcast career that way. My first year pro was 84, and my roommate was Jim Ralph. And so Ralphie and I were playing for the Milwaukee Admirals, and he'd actually emceed my wedding in 87. So he knew Lynn and I.
That's right.
We went back a ways in Ottawa, but now we're roommates together. And he, every morning, the hotels, that was the IHL. We were in the Knights Inn and probably this Super 8 or whatever, Motel 6 and motels like that. And he'd wake up in the morning, we'd get either the local paper or the USA Today, because I believe that was just starting at the time. And he'd say, well, because my nickname was Spank, he'd say, well, Spank, he says, let's go, let's read it. We'd have a coffee. We'd both be, beside each other in our hotel rooms. And he'd be like, last night in Minnesota, Don Beaupre made 42 saves, and the Minnesota, North Stars beat the Hartford Whalers 3-2. And then he'd go, then I'd go, and then he'd go, and then I'd go, then he'd go, and then we finish our coffee and we'd go off the morning skate. Well, a couple of years later, I'm playing in Halifax, and my roommate was, or my teammate, we weren't roommates, was Darryl Ray. So, and Darryl Ray kind of had the same path as Ralphie did, where he was in the East Coast League, and he ended up doing play-by-play a lot and did everything. Very talented guy. And again, now he's been in the business for the same amount of time. So kind of neat the way all of us goaltenders ended up having the passion for broadcasting, much like we did for, not stopping pucks. And some of us stop more than others. Huh, Millsy?
Right. Trying.
Hey, by the way, Millsy, I got something for you here.
What do you got?
Well, this is a really neat thing. Hopefully people can see this. Is that right side up?
Yep, you got her.
So that's an original, puck from the old Chicago Stadium, the old days where the pucks were a little different. They were more, but on the back, because I'm cleaning out my house as well, like everybody else. I got VHS
yeah, no kidding.
everything. But then I looked at the back of it, and it says, first playoff win. See, nobody gave me a plaque or anything like that. And it was against Millsy and the St. Louis Blues. Now, Millsy, you won that series, and if I'm not mistaken, you were the first Blues goalie in history to win a playoff series against the Chicago Blackhawks. And
that's something I didn't know. No. But I remember the big hug we had afterwards in the lineup because of mutual respect. I certainly had for you. You had an unbelievable series, by the way, if people don't know that, and it was kind of cool. And here we are, amazing.
Yeah. That was really something else. Do you remember the game after this? Because I only won one playoff game, and this was it. It was in Chicago Stadium. And the next game, we were actually leading, and it looked like we were going to tie the series up at 2. And Tony Herkus scored 4 on me that night. Still a rookie record for a St. Louis Blues player. And I always bug Herc every time I see the circus because he's a scout now with Tampa Bay, and I see him at the rinks every once in a while. And we go through. We have to go through all 4 goals he scored on me, Millsy. So I'm sure you were happy at your end to see it. I can't remember what number Herc was. 18 maybe.
18.
Yeah, 18.
You're right. And you know something. You know something, Panger. We always remember those nights, and I can tell you, the forwards always remember too. And I just saw Jimmy Fox recently in LA. He scored that overtime goal against us in Sault Ste. Marie for Ottawa to win in 8 games. And I've never forgiven him, ever, for that. And I just saw him before we got shut down. And I mentioned it to him like I do every time I see him. You're the guy that screwed us up in the Sault with Gretzky on our team, game 8 in the Sault. And so you never forget.
Wow. Did they go to the Memorial Cup that year?
Yeah, that was the Bobby Smith year. And I think they get beat by
Avon Jolly.
Yeah, they had a heck of a team. Yeah. Or was that the Peterborough year?
Do you remember a guy named Steve?
I should know that. I'm sitting in Peterborough, but anyway.
Do you remember Steve Maringer?
I do.
Remember that defenseman? He was number 4. He was like undersized. He played like 5 years in the Ontario Hockey League, and then he went off to Europe for a while. I was just reminded the other day, we were talking about the 67s and me growing up there, and that was my NHL. And I said, I think the best player I ever saw was Steve Maringer. And no one would remember him because he never turned pro, and he was so small. But nowadays, Millsy, he would have been unbelievable now, because now, in our era, the goalies were that size and the defensemen were huge, and now the goalies are huge and the defensemen are tiny. Crazy how it's worked.
John, I know you wanted to ask Panger a bit about this whole situation, the great year last year and how,
Yeah. I mean, what a year for St. Louis. You come off a Stanley Cup win. The team is playing very well. And then you get into a situation now where you had the Jay Bouwmeester incident happen, and now we're on pause. Talk about a roller coaster of emotions for everyone in St. Louis in under 12 months.
Yeah, incredible highs and incredible lows. I never thought, and I did talk to Millsy about this last time we saw him and any of the other broadcasters that I've run across. I think when you do this a long time, you wonder what it would feel like to win or be a part of a team that wins the Stanley Cup. And I always I didn't shrug it off disrespectfully, but I always just wanted to win it as a player. And then after that, I wanted to win it in maybe coaching or managing or in some capacity. And then, so I was kind of curious as to how it would feel. And I got to tell you something, it was unbelievable. And to the St. Louis Blues, Doug Armstrong and the staff, we were allowed to travel with the team. We did an hour pregame show on Fox Sports Midwest and a little postgame show. And it wasn't very much, but it was enough for the locals to enjoy. And but our team never wavered. They didn't say, oh, it's the playoffs, it's the second round, you can't come on the plane. It's a third round, you can't come on the plane. They kept our spots the same way. They acted normally the entire year. And they didn't change anything because it was the playoffs. And so we got to ride home from Boston on the plane. And, the Stanley Cup just kind of sat there. And I would look back and I would see the looks on the players' faces. I took one of Chris Thorburn and I gave it to him at his Stanley Cup party. He invited me to it because it was outside of Michigan where I have a summer place. And I gave him the picture and he'd never seen it before. But his eyes were big as saucers. He was just leaning on a chair like this. And he's staring at the Stanley Cup. And I just happened to turn around and I had my phone and I just snapped this picture and I put it in a cool black and white and the Stanley Cup's just there in the middle of the plane. And then we had the Conn Smythe trophy sitting there. We got Larry Robinson, who's an advisor. we had Al McGinnis as a senior advisor to Doug Armstrong, and we had Ryan O'Reilly. So we had 3 Conn Smythe Trophy winners. They're all taking pictures there with the Conn Smythe Trophy, and so besides the partying and everything else, for me that was a really special moment for me. And then the year started out, and I couldn't believe how great the team was. I can't believe how good they've been all season long, and that there was no real letdown. And then it happened in Anaheim with Jay, and that was as challenging as a broadcast as I've ever been a part of. Trying to be the conduit to information without saying too much. As we well know, we're not doctors, so I had to be very careful. And then when we ended the season, we actually had to go back to Anaheim for the replacement game. And when we walked into the building, it was eerie. I mean, this is where Jay was taken out. This is between the benches, and I remember walking around just myself, just to kind of get over it, because I was between the benches with Brian Hayward of Anaheim for the game. Now, this happens, and then the game ends, and then it was it. Like, there was, we found out kind of before the game that trouble was happening, that the season may likely be suspended. So, boy, there's a whirlwind of emotions going back to Anaheim, and now, of course, we haven't played any more games since then.
Up to this point, since we're all NHL broadcasters here, what would you think about the Jack Adams? I don't know what's going to happen with the trophy at the moment, but to this point, at least, who do you think might be some leading candidates in your mind?
Yeah, my brain's been off of that for a bit, but I'll tell you who I'll give number 1 to, and maybe the fans in St. Louis wouldn't agree, because I think they would think that Craig Berube's done a heck of a job, but I'm going to put it in perspective, because being there in Boston, where you lose Game 7 in your own building, I can't imagine how they all. I mean, I just can't imagine how those players felt. And Bruce Cassidy's a longtime friend of mine, and I know how devastating it was. But I'm more impressed with how they've come out of it, and played this year than maybe anything else. I mean, more so than the Blues. The Blues could do anything this year, and they won. But the Bruins, I mean, I was just amazed with the job that they've done, and I think that coaching staff is phenomenal. So I'm gonna give it to Bruce Cassidy.
Well,
as my number 1.
Darren, for sure, we know one thing. He's a wonderful person, and he's a dear friend of yours. I know that. And also so good with us, right? He always tells exactly the way it is. He doesn't hide. He's very honest, and a real treat to be around. And you can tell with his players, he's got to be the same way, very upfront. So, I mean, that's an excellent choice, in my opinion. It's certainly one. The other thing I wanted to ask you, I'm going to put you on the spot, because I have a horrible memory for this kind of stuff, but you've been on every network, you've done the Olympics, you've done so many things in your career. Do you have a couple of moments that stick out, that either funny or special or something like that along the run? I know you got a lot. It's hard. I get asked and I always forget, but maybe you can come up with one or something for us.
You know what, Millsy? I was just reminded the other day, because it was on TV, and NHL Network here in the States have been replaying. I'm sure the same thing going in Canada, but replaying a lot of the older games. And it reminded me the first U.S. Winter Classic in Buffalo. You were working for Hockey Night, and I was working between the benches for that game. I think Pierre Maguire was maybe doing the World Junior Championship, so Sam Flood gave me a call, and I went and did it. And there was a bunch of shots of you and me together right between there, and that snow coming down, and players changing their visors, having a visor on, having to take it off because of all the snow. Remember that I jumped onto it was one of my favorite broadcasts, because we had a conference call a couple of weeks before that, Millsy and John, and I was working for the Coyotes at the time, and they had agreed to allow me to wear skates and as the between the benches guy in Arizona, I could put my skates on, and they were going to allow me during the course of the game, basically in commercial breaks and in the warm-up, to do interviews. So I had this great idea, and I was all excited about it. At the end of the conference call with NBC, I mentioned it on the air. Sam Flood calls me back, and he goes, "Hey, about that skate thing." He goes, "I love it. Don't do it with the Coyotes before you do it with us." And as you remember, I had the skates on the entire game. I had the those foot warmers inside them, and I jumped on the ice, and I interviewed Ryan Miller in the warm-up. And then when the ice started getting really bad, I went out on the ice, and poor Dan Craig, the ice genius, there I am remember I just jumped over the boards. I'm on the ice and I'm making snowballs and I'm giving a report on it. I'm throwing snowballs to Eddie Olczyk and Doc. And so that broadcast, personally, I had the time of my life. And if they never did another one after that, I would have been fine, except that there were so many other great ones after that. But that's a good memory. And I think the first Olympics, I think, that the NHL players did, Millsy, in 98. I worked for CBS, and JD was up in the booth, and I was down literally between the benches. Wow. And there was no glass between the benches. And, I think John Shannon was doing the world feed, and he said, I got a spot for you. You're the only one that's able to be right there. And I didn't realize at the time how special that would be, because you weren't just allowed to go to the locker rooms, but I was allowed to get access everywhere between the benches. And I remember Canada, I didn't think they were that organized when they got to the shootout against the Czech Republic, and no one knew the list of the shooters. And so, JD's up in the booth, everybody's looking for information. They're showing the bench, and I couldn't understand the Czech Republic bench. It was like about 4:00 in the morning when I'm having a glass of wine. That's how much I could understand that. With you,
I get that.
but it ends up I could hear Mark Crawford and his coaching staff yell out the names, and so I would go, geez, I might even be able to remember them. Hang on a second.
Wow. Good for you. I wouldn't be able
to. Let's go. Theo Fleury, Brendan Shanahan, Ray Bourque, Eric Lindros. Man, Neuendijk maybe. Anyway, I remember yelling them one at a time, and so they'd have that information. So that's how close I was. And I remember that game being a heck of a game. Nobody really remembers, Czech won it because of Dominic and that team, but that game was a heck of a hockey game. And so that's kind of a big memory for me, I think. And then having, the other Millsy, I'll kind of recap it real quick, but having, how close Steve Yzerman and I have been, it's been a 40-year great friendship. And when Steve won it in 97, I was on the ice for ESPN, and that was my job, is to do the interviews. And I got to interview Steve in 97, 98, and 2002 on the ice after he'd won the Stanley Cups. And then I was with him for every one of the Olympics as well. The loss in Nagano, but the win in 2002, the win in 2010. And so I think those are the most special when they include your friends.
Yeah, great stuff there. And, it's what we should tell the fans too. I mean, we were in different networks, but, we share information. We were between the benches in Buffalo, and there was a lot of information. That was the game where, I think every weather pattern happened, and we could watch the clouds come over. Remember, there was freezing rain, and then it rained, and then it snowed. And that was the first time that I saw Sidney Crosby as competitive as he was. And he got dinged pretty hard that night too. But I looked at him and went, I have never seen a guy work as hard as this and be as competitive as Sidney Crosby in my entire life. And I've been around this racket for, I don't know how many years now, too many. But
remember when he flipped the puck? Remember when the snow was so bad and so piled up, it was like playing street hockey and back home with the snow building up and having a tennis ball, and he flipped that puck up once, twice, 3 times, and then scooted right between the two defensemen. Phenomenal stuff.
Yeah, and we trade ideas, we trade back and forth, find out information. And I don't know if the fans realize that just because we're in different networks and we're on the other side of the border, we're great friends, and we can help each other in those situations, and we should be doing it, because it's all about getting whatever we can get to the fans as quickly as we can. So that was a fun experience, and certainly the other ones you told, those are special moments. That's fantastic.
I've got one for both of you, because you're both between the benches. And I'm not. I'm way up top. I'm safe. But you guys are right in the line of fire. Panger, I'll start with you. Close calls you've had to really getting dinged in between the benches by a stick or puck or flying object or anyone coming through.
I the first time when I was working a game for NBC, and I think it might have been I'm not sure where it was, but I think it was Ehrhoff. Ehrhoff ended up having the having a like kind of taking a risk or trying to get rid of it, and Glenn Healy was beside me, and he kind of scooted out of the way, and I literally caught the puck, and I remember going, wow, but it stung my hand. But game, and I actually it was in Nashville, and I was peeking over, and it got redirected, and it came through, and I got this way wearing glasses, and it clipped my the earmuff of the headset and spun it off, and I had part of it on my head. it looked like my head fell apart. And basically I picked up the other part. I was talking like it was an old Maxwell smartphone. And I remember both coaches, Peter Laviolette was at one side, and I'm not sure if it was Ken Hitchcock at the other side. Both coaches and trainers were right up against the glass because they were so concerned, because they weren't sure what it was that came whipping from my head. They thought it was my glasses on my cut, and I pop up with the other piece. I'm like, all good, everybody. So there's been a couple of close ones where you got to kind of use your hands, but I mean that's part of the business. I'd rather be down there personally than be up top.
Yeah, you feel a part of it. I know we're running out of time. I think it was in Toronto. I got a stick over the head, and we've had a few of those. I mean, not thankfully, hit my head. So that's the good news. But the sticks can be really flying at times, as you know, Darren, and that can be a bit of an issue. The other issue we've got, there's a couple of buildings. Now, Florida, finally they fixed it this year. I was shocked, but still Philadelphia, there's no room behind. Toronto's a bad one too, because they put seats there. They've sold seats on us. Now you can't get back to get out of the way. So now you're in the line of fire. So there are a few buildings now that, and I go to those games and go, okay, let's see if we can get through this one again. And but thanks, John, for that, because you've jinxed us. Both.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, when we're both back, you're both going to get dinged in your next games. Yeah, for sure. Hey, you know what? I got hit this year though. Madison Square Garden at the Leafs Rangers game in the intermission. The T-shirt cannon went off, and I'm up there in the intermission talking, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, something hits me in the arm. I looked at from the ice. It came all the way up and hit me in the side of the arm. So I felt like I was in the episode of The Simpsons for a minute there when Homer ducks and Maude Flanders takes the T-shirt cannon. I was all right, but out of nowhere, you don't expect to get hit up that high in the bridge at MSG, but it happened. So. Well, listen, Panger, great chatting with you, my friend. You look good. This was fun. Maybe we'll have a little more time for you as well in the future. But thanks for dropping by with us. Take care, stay safe, and we'll catch up with you again soon.
Well, my pleasure being the first one here, and always good talking whatever with you both, and great sharing some old stories too, Millsy. I know we go back a long way, pal. So keep up the great work, and
we sure
hopefully we see you guys soon.
Always great to see you, Panger. We sure do. We'll always have that bond, won't we? It's how we started. It's kind of fun.
That's exactly right, pal. Thanks.
Old-time hockey. Holy jumping. That was a lot of fun to have our good buddy Darren Pang on, wasn't it?
Yeah, he loves to say holy jumping. We know that. And again, it was fun to talk about how we started together. I totally forgot about some of the stories. I certainly remember sitting up in the Chicago Stadium with Darren, though, and doing a lot of the play-by-play and color and trying to learn this craft the hard way. But it was fun, and it got us in the business. So here we are today.
Well, he showed the puck that he had for that playoff game against you that he had. So how about this one for you right here? This puck, maybe you can see there.
Yeah.
Well, this puck is actually from my first Hockey Night in Canada game, which I broadcast with you. So there you go. And it's even got the pass on the back. Yeah, with the Ottawa Senators and against Carolina. So,
and I think I said to you one day, John Bartlett, you're going to be a network broadcaster very soon. And that was pretty obvious to me very quickly that you were going to be just that.
The funny thing is you never said, boy, we're also going to be hosting a show on the internet called From the Booth.
No, and I also didn't know you'd be dragging me to the dino all the time for lunch. So there you go.
Yes, exactly. See, I'm teaching you how to eat while on the road. There you go. So, show and tell, pucks for everyone, stopping them and scoring them on this show. Thanks for watching From the Booth, folks. We'll see you next time. So long.